by famed author and playwright Agatha Christie that goes, "A mother's love for her child is like nothing else in the world. It knows no law, no pity. It dares all things and crushes down remorselessly everything that stands in its path." There's something pretty special about the love a parent has for a child. It has a way of reshaping our priorities, influencing our decisions, and leading us to make sacrifices we never imagined we'd willingly make. Long before a child is ever born, many of us have already thought about the kind of parent we hope to become. More often than not, our vision for parenthood is shaped by what we've witnessed, what we've experienced, and sometimes by what we longed for but never had ourselves. Hello, and welcome to Daring Woman. I'm Dr. Latasha Pinckney, and through my work, I help people better understand the experiences, beliefs, and perspectives that shape how they see themselves, others, and the world around them so they can move forward with greater clarity, awareness, and intention. Whether you've been here for a while or you're new to the channel, welcome. Now let's get into it. In case you haven't noticed, since the rebrand of this channel, I've been detailing how beliefs, some of which we are unaware of, follow us throughout life. In last week's episode, we talked about how believing I was unloved followed me into my marriage, and while it didn't keep me from loving my husband, it did shape the way I received the love he was trying to give me. But marriage wasn't the only place those beliefs showed up. They also influenced the way I approached motherhood. Now, while today's conversation centers on motherhood, it's really about something much bigger. It's about how the beliefs we carry shape the way we express love. One of my earliest childhood memories is of me telling my aunt that when I grew up, I wanted to be a wife and mother. Honestly, I have no idea why those two roles mattered so much to me. Maybe it was instinct, some internal wiring that was driving this desire. Or maybe it was shaped by what I saw on television or in the families around me. Whatever the case, all I know is that the longing stayed with me. Of course, it would be some time before I would become either of those things. And out of all the many roles life handed me, for instance, that of a daughter, a sister, a friend, a mentor, an educator, and now someone who has the privilege of walking alongside others as they examine the beliefs that have influenced their lives, none have shaped me more profoundly than being a wife and a mother. If I'm being honest, motherhood came naturally to me. Even before I fully understood what it meant to be a mother, I believed I knew what that role required. Like many of us, my understanding of parenthood had already been shaped by what I had witnessed, what I had internalized, and the examples that surrounded me long before I ever had my first child. By the time I became a mother, I already had a picture in my mind of the mother I wanted to be. I looked forward to watching my children grow through every stage of life, celebrating each milestone along the way, spending time together, and being the place they could turn to for comfort, safety, and love. What I couldn't yet see was that I was also responding to a little girl's longing in ways I would not understand until much later. The truth is that beliefs don't simply disappear when life changes. They often show up in new ways as we move through different seasons of life. The belief I formed as a little girl that I was somehow unloved didn't just disappear as I got older. It followed me into my marriage, and it followed me into motherhood as well. The reality was that I loved being a mother. From the very beginning, I poured myself into it. I wanted my children to have the kind of childhood where love wasn't something they ever had to wonder about. I wanted them to experience it in the everyday moments of life and to grow up with the confidence that they were deeply loved. I imagine many parents can relate to that. Whether our childhood was filled with love or marked by things we wish had been different, most of us want something good for our children. We want them to feel safe, to feel valued, and secure in the knowledge that someone will always be there for them. The beliefs we carry don't only influence the way we receive love, they also influence the way we express it. That's one of the reasons two people can deeply love the same person and yet express that love very differently. The love itself may be genuine, but the beliefs beneath it often shape how that love is communicated. I think this is one of the ways beliefs continue expressing themselves throughout our lives. They don't just simply influence how we think, they influence what we hold most closely, where we invest our time and energy, and even the roles that become so important to us. They shape the way we love, the way we protect, and the sacrifices we're willing to make. So, because of what I had experienced as a child, I became deeply committed to making sure my children never had to question whether they were loved. That conviction shaped countless decisions I made. It influenced how I showed up, how much of myself I willingly gave, and the sacrifices I made along the way. Unlike many of the relationships in my life, I never had to question whether I loved my children, nor whether they loved me. Their love wasn't something I found myself trying to interpret or make sense of. I simply knew they loved me, and they knew I loved them. What I didn't recognize at the time was that while I was loving and raising my children, God was also doing a deeper work within me. The same role that allowed me to pour love into their lives also became one of the places where I experienced the kind of love I had longed for as a little girl. My children didn't care about what I had accomplished or what I could do for them. To them, I was simply their mother, and they loved me. And somewhere in the middle of it all, God was gently restoring parts of my own heart that had carried the weight of that early belief for years. What I didn't fully appreciate, however, was that the belief that I was unloved wasn't only influencing the way I loved my children, it was also quietly shaping the way I understood myself in the role of being their mother. For me, motherhood gradually became more than just the responsibility of raising my children. It became one of the primary places where I found purpose and value. Of course, there's nothing unusual about finding purpose in being a mother. I think many of us who are parents would say our children are among the greatest gifts God has entrusted to us. The issue wasn't that I found joy in motherhood or that I loved my children deeply. It was how much of myself had become wrapped up in that one role. Over time, my life became completely centered around my children. I wanted to be present for them through every stage of their lives. I wanted to be the one they came to when they needed comfort, direction, or simply someone to listen to. More than anything, I wanted them to grow up knowing they were deeply loved. Because that had become my understanding of what good motherhood required, it gradually became the place where most of my time, energy, and attention were invested. And along the way, I lost a number of friendships, not because those relationships didn't matter to me, but because there never seemed to be enough of me to go around. In full transparency, I believed no one, including their father, I know, would be as intentional about making sure my children knew they were loved more than I was. I was so determined to be for my children what I had longed for as a little girl. Having grown up surrounded by women who shouldered most of the responsibility for raising their children, that became my model for motherhood. I had never really seen a husband and wife share that responsibility, so without ever thinking about it, I took on much of it myself. After a while, giving so much of myself simply became normal. So I never gave it much thought because to me, that's what loving my children meant. And I want to be clear about something. I don't think there's anything wrong with being intentional about loving the people we care about. We should be. But I also think it's worth paying attention to what we believe love requires of us because our experiences have a subtle way of shaping those beliefs. For me, that meant giving as much of myself as I could. Now, I was genuinely thankful that my children were growing up with the stability and love I had always wanted for them. But at the same time, watching them experience those things sometimes reminded me of what had been missing from my own life. I think moments like these remind us that we don't have to choose between gratitude and longing. I could be deeply grateful for what my children were experiencing while still feeling the weight of what I had longed for as a little girl. In many ways, motherhood, like marriage, became a mirror for me. In one season, it reflected what had been missing from my own childhood. In another, it reflected just how deeply I had poured myself into loving my children. That became especially clear when my oldest left for college. I didn't realize just how much his leaving would affect me. Like any mother, of course, I missed him. I think that's something most parents expect. We spend years preparing our children for that day because we want them to become independent, to pursue the lives God has for them, and to step confidently into adulthood. The truth is, knowing that day is coming and living through it are two very different things. I think life transitions have a way of bringing things into focus that we don't always notice while life is moving along as it always has. As long as we're busy living out our responsibilities, we don't always stop to consider how much of ourselves we've invested in those roles. It's often not until those responsibilities begin to change that we see them differently. That's what this season became for me. For years, motherhood had been the primary way I expressed my love for my children. So when that season began to change, I wasn't just adjusting to my son leaving for college, I was also adjusting to the fact that my children no longer needed me in the same ways they once had. And if I'm being honest, that was hard. Truthfully, somewhere along the way, I had begun to associate love with being needed. And who needs you more than your children? So there was a part of me that quietly wondered if they would still love me the same. But I had to remind myself that my children coming into their own didn't mean they loved me any less. It simply meant that our relationship was entering a new season. And while it is true that God had already begun restoring parts of my heart through that relationship, the fact remains that healing is a journey and some destinations take longer to reach. When I think about my own life, I'm reminded that our experiences often influence us in ways we don't always immediately recognize. They don't just affect what we believe about ourselves, they can also influence the way we love the people who matter most. That's one of the reasons I wanted to share this part of my life with you. I realize your experiences may be very different from mine, but I think many of us are still living with the influence of moments we may not have fully understood when they happen. Maybe your experience isn't about believing you were unloved. Maybe it was something entirely different. But whatever it may be, I hope this conversation encourages you to take a closer look at it and consider what experiences may still be influencing the way you express love today. Not so you can blame the past or stay stuck in it, but so you can better understand yourself. Because when we better understand ourselves, we're able to make more intentional choices about the way we live, the way we relate to others, and the way we love. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. All right, you know what comes next. If today's conversation resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and be sure to like, share, and subscribe so these conversations can reach others. And don't forget to join me here each Thursday for a new episode. And until next time, keep reflecting, keep growing, and remember that sometimes the most powerful shifts begin with a single question.